Church, Mr. Bret Grote from the Human Rights Coalition.
Hi, how y'all doing today? I didn't hear until today that DA Zappala has an expert on excessive force. I'm wondering what somebody has to go to school for how long to be an expert on excessive force. I wonder what his decision will be about beating somebody with a tree branch, and how you need to be an expert to decide whether or not that was excessive, or ripping their hair out of their head. Now, whenever we gather at these things, whenever there are instances of police brutality or any sort of corruption within the system, we always hear that there's a few bad apples, right? There's a few bad apples. There's some people that just aren't doing their job the way that they're supposed to be doing it. Question I always have when people talk about bad apples, though, is where are the good ones, right? How many police officers are out here against police brutality? How many of them have spoken up against this? How many of them don't participate in the blue wall of silence? I remember talking with a state prisoner a few years back down at SCI Green, and we were talking about the bad apples. He suggested it was a bad orchard, and we agreed that it's actually more or less a bad seed. So if we want justice for Jordan Miles, I think it's important that we really understand the role of the police force. I'm going to be brief, but reiterate many of the points that Walter was making. And you don't have to listen to Walter and believe his own analysis of the system. We can take it from somebody from the opposite end of the political spectrum. Richard Nixon, one of his chief henchmen, Haldeman, wrote in his memoirs that the boss always used to emphasize that the problem was the blacks, and you had to devise a system which dealt with that, but did not appear to deal with that, did not appear to be designed in a racist manner. Okay, Nixon left office in '74. What was going on in the country around then? Let's look at incarceration rates. Since they've been keeping track of those throughout the 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they've been pretty stable. The number of people in prison per the population. In the 1970s, they began to climb. Okay, in the 1980s, when Reagan entered office, they skyrocketed in ways which were historically unprecedented. Now, what happened in the 60s and the 70s was that groups that have been traditionally shut out of the political system, disenfranchised, exploited, brutalized, had their land stolen, in the case of indigenous people, subjected to genocide, they began pressing their demands, organizing for their rights, and waging what was a very powerful social revolution that terrified the people in power and the elites that run the system. Their strategy, one of the core elements of it, was the development of the prison industrial complex. I'm not going to go through all the history now, but the primary force driving this has been the war on drugs, which has been nothing of the sort. It's been a race and class war that was redeclared by Ronald Reagan in 1982 at a time when drug use was going down. And for those of you who haven't read Professor Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, I would suggest you get that and review that. She goes through the history and the real motivations of the system. It's a very important work. Hopefully Professor Alexander will be coming here in the fall also. So what has been the impact of this? The U.S. now incarcerates more people than any nation in the history of the planet. 1 out of any 100 adults is in jail or state or federal prisons. And whenever you break the numbers down according to race, they're even more stark. One statistic I want to throw out there is that South Africa, apartheid South Africa in 1993, incarcerated 800 out of black males, 851 out of every 100,000 black males. The United States in 2006 incarcerated 4,789 black males out of every 100,000. That is more than 5.5 to 5.5 times the number that they incarcerated in apartheid South Africa. And some people would have us believe that we live in a post-racial era. Most are non-violent offenders. It's been the war on drugs, which has been disproportionately waged in communities of color, and there is overwhelming statistical evidence that people across all races, across all classes, use illicit drugs at about the same levels. If anything, white people with money use them more because they got the money to pay for them. So the Pittsburgh Police and the District's Attorney Office, with the quiet support of the city's political and corporate elite, are waging an unacknowledged but devastating assault on human rights in this city. Racial profiling, police harassment and brutality, wrongful convictions, and this cynical and counterproductive war on drugs are sending people to hospitals, prisons, and graveyards, as Renee emphasized, ripping families apart and enforcing an unjust political order that serves profits over people. The Jordan Miles case has awakened and outraged many. More people realize that we need to put a stop to this for the sake of our families and children. But how do we take this to the next level? I would suggest that we need organizers. We need a lot more organizers than we have right now. There's more than 80 neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. Can we find 20 organizers to begin regular canvassing of these 80 neighborhoods? 40? What about 2 a neighborhood? How do we get 10,000 people in the streets downtown on a Tuesday? How do we surround the courthouse and the financial center and see when they start making concessions then, when they start to feel their power slipping? Maybe we need to set a date 6 months in advance, 10 months in advance, 12 months in advance even, and start building for such a demonstration of power and doing that outreach. To do that, we need organizers, and we need the people that are going to be finding ways that they can, with their very busy lives, to get word out in the community and to contribute each day to bring more people on board and to listen, primarily to be listening to the stories that of what the police are doing to others in their community. If you go out in any of these neighborhoods where there's a heavy police presence and do some flyering for Jordan Miles, everybody has a story about how their loved ones have been framed and sent away upstate for things they haven't done, about how they've been stopped and frisked and brutalized. Every single person has these stories because this is happening on a daily basis. So it's by doing these tedious, daily, often thankless tasks of organizing that we're going to be able to create a narrative that's going to mobilize people so that we can bring this corrupt and racist system to a halt. Ultimately, justice for Jordan Miles has to be about ending race and class-based mass incarceration and redirecting government spending to badly needed social programs, job creation, mental and physical health care, drug treatment, education, and ecological restoration. If you want to get involved in organizing, please see me or others with the Alliance for Police Accountability before you leave today. Give us your contact information and do what you can to help make these events bigger and more powerful. Thank you.